My name is Edward Anderson, and today what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a brief introduction to platforms. In particular, what we will do is I'm going to give you a definition of what platforms are, so that when you talk about platforms, you'll know what they are. I will talk about various decisions that need to be made when you're designing a platform. And I'm also going to talk about some open questions where researchers and conventional wisdom still don't know how platforms behave or how they should be managed. And so you'll understand that as well. Today, the number of platforms that are the top global companies by market capitalization are 7. Whereas back in 2009, there were arguably only 2. And we expect that to go up as well. Now, what does this mean? What it means is that there are a number of new business models that are becoming predominant in the market. And right now, platforms is the biggest and most important of those. I'll also note here that Visa is actually a platform. So it doesn't have to be a tech industry. More on that in a bit. To begin with, we have to realize that platforms are actually a form of supply chain. But to understand that, we have to go back and consider what a traditional supply chain is. And this is what is called the linear supply chain, or oftentimes a pipe. And the idea is that you start with raw materials. Those go to the manufacturers, which are then made into parts. Think of this as a car industry. Then it goes to an assembler like Ford or General Motors. And then that vehicle is actually given to a dealer to be sold. Now, importantly, not only is value accumulated step by step through the supply chain, but also money flows from step to step as well. So from retailer to assembler, from assembler to parts manufacturer, and then to raw materials supplier. In contrast, if we look at a platform, it's a supply chain as well, but it has a triangular relationship. So what we have here is we have 2 sides of a platform. Oftentimes, it's easier to think of them as a customer and a supplier. Now, the exchange of value is not accumulated linearly. It is directly exchanged between side A and side B. The platform itself doesn't exchange any value. All it does is it facilitates that exchange, like a marketplace. Also, typically, dollars tend to flow between sides A and sides B, customer and supplier. It goes through the platform. And from that, the platform makes its money so that it can continue in existence. Where is value created in a platform? There are 3 sources. One is the standalone value. So if you think of an iPhone or any other smartphone, it has a certain value that's inherent in it. So you use it to speak to other phones. You can text other cell phones. And also it can take pictures. So that's independent of how many other customers there are, how many iPhone users, or how many app providers there are. In contrast, there can also be a same-side externality. For example, if you think of Facebook, the reason you joined Facebook in all likelihood was because your friends were already on Facebook. So the more people that are on Facebook, the more consumers, the more valuable it is to you. That only involves one side of the market, however. Doesn't matter whether there are any suppliers of any sort. So we come to the cross-site externality, which runs between the customer and the supplier. And when you think of this, let's use a smartphone example again. The more apps you have from suppliers, that's going to give more functionality to the customer. So the customers are more likely to join if there are more apps. By the same token, once there are more customers that are using smartphones, let's say an iPhone to be particular, then that makes it more attractive for new suppliers to bring new apps to the market. And so you get a chicken and egg effect where customers, the more of them you have, the more app suppliers you get. The more app suppliers you get, it drives up customers still more. And a chicken and egg effect, which is a type of reinforcing loop or a virtuous cycle. One example, and this is a famous one from David Sachs of Yammer. He wrote down on a napkin, I kid you not, the value proposition of Uber. And his observation was that the more, excuse me, the more demand you have, that is from consumers, that would tend to drive more drivers, and that would cause you to have an area that is more geographically saturated. And so it's going to be easier for consumers to actually have pickups more quickly. And once you have faster pickups, you're going to get yet more demand. So more demand begets more demand, and you have this reinforcing loop. Now, of course, there are other externalities at play as well, too. So again, more geographic coverage, that means that drivers are going to be busier for any time that they work. And because of that, that means that for any given driver, it's going to take a lower price per consumer to keep them gainfully employed. And that drives more demand, which drives more drivers, and so on. Now, I'm going to give you a few examples of platforms, some of which you haven't really or aren't really considered platforms normally, but they indeed are because they facilitate a direct exchange of value. For example, we all know smartphones, but one of the original platforms, honestly, was the credit card. And what the credit card does is it allows merchants and consumers to have a direct exchange of value, i.e., you can buy, for instance, camping equipment from REI, and Visa facilitates that transaction of money. And then, of course, Visa gets a certain percentage of it from the merchant in credit card example. Another example is, and you really wouldn't think of this, is an F-16 fighter jet. And the reason I say this is because all those weapon pods on the bottom, these things, most of them are made by third parties, say Raytheon, for example. They're not produced by Lockheed Martin, which actually makes the plane. But different nations buy that F-16 primarily for those pods. Can be different types of weapons, air to ship, air to ground, air to air, radar jamming, and so on. Now, of course, if you have more purchasers, then more companies are going to participate and offer more pods. So it's a platform, even if it isn't what we think of as a tech platform. Another one is Amazon. And I think most people realize this is a platform, but it's an interesting type of platform. So what happens with Amazon is that Amazon is a pipe for many of its products. For example, it buys books from publishers and then it stores them in inventory and then ships them directly to the consumer. However, there's also Amazon Marketplace. So for a lot of products, there are third-party merchants who buy and inventory their own products and actually ship them to you, albeit Amazon, because it facilitated the purchase, gets a royalty off of it. When you design a platform, there are a number of decisions you have to make. One is monetization. So which side of the platform do you charge and how much? Well, traditionally, from research economics, we know that typically, all other things equal, what happens is you charge the side of the market that gets the most benefit from additional companies or people participating on the other side. So let's think about, for example, smartphones again. And every app, when it sees an additional consumer, is proportionately speaking going to get, on average, an additional increment of money, and it's linear. On the other hand, a consumer, once you get past a certain number of apps, it really doesn't matter whether you have 50 or 500 that are for sale. And so the marginal benefit to a consumer of an additional app is pretty tiny. And so that explains why apps pay the royalties for smartphones. Another example is whether you use subscription or purchasing as your mode of earning money. Now, an example would be, interestingly enough, not smartphones themselves, but the cellular companies that sell you or provide service to your smartphones. And so, cellular company on one side, it's got phone providers that actually can provide apps. So it's a nested platform. And on the other side, you have consumers. And they charge you a subscription. You pay a phone bill every month, based on the amount of activity that you do. Now, on the other hand, you have the purchase model, which is typical in smartphones, most commonly when you buy an app. In fact, at one time, it was almost always purchase. But these days, like for example, if you look at, say, weather apps or, for example, weather apps are a good one. There, it's all about subscription. And every time there's a subscription, some of that money goes to Apple. There's also data aggregation. For example, Google doesn't make its money off of charging you. What it makes money off of is looking at your information, aggregating with it others, and then using that to target advertisements better by the people who use it for advertising. And because they can better target with Google, those advertisers pay a higher rate in ads. And there are a number of other decisions with respect to monetization, but those are three of them. There are also product development decisions. One is, how scalable do you want your platform to be? And let's think of this on the tech side in particular. The more scalable a product is, the more money you're going to have to spend. So if you think, for example, that your platform may take off really fast, you're going to have to pay money up front to make it scalable, because making things scalable costs money. On the other hand, if it's going to be a more gentle takeoff, you think, you can afford to pay for scalability along the way. Another issue is, how often do you introduce new versions? So the thing is that there's a trade-off. Every time you as a platform, for example, say iOS, introduce a new version, then your iPhone's going to have more functionality. And in principle, the apps can take advantage of that functionality. However, it takes time. And in fact, those applications may actually be broken and non-functional until they're able to adapt to the new platform. Or it just may have some bugs. Point is, it's going to cost those platforms money in product development. Also, consumers get hassled. I think a lot of you have had problems whenever you change operating systems, either in iOS or Android. That's the most common one, although we see it a lot, of course, with personal computers as well. And so there's a trade-off. You provide more functionality as a platform, eventually that will probably turn into a better experience by the consumer and actually create better functionality for the app providers. But in the short term, there's going to be disruptive costs. So the question is how often do you want to add functionality? How much functionality you want to add, and how much you want to risk stranding your app suppliers? Also, there's a mix issue. We talked about the three types of value that a consumer gets from a platform. Well, how much do you want to spend in each one? Do you want to concentrate on standalone value? Do you want to concentrate on same side? Do you want to concentrate on cross side? Or do you want a mix of them? And if so, which ones do you emphasize more? Now, that's a basic introduction to what platforms are. And as a reminder, it's all about this triangular supply chain There's a direct exchange of value between the two sides of the market. And in supply chain terms, it's easy to think of them as customer and supplier. Now, once a platform is established, that's a great thing. But there are a number of open questions that remain. First of all, how do you get successful in the first place? When you start up a platform, you're in this strange situation where you have to get customers and you have to get suppliers to participate in your platform, even though there's nobody on the other side. So that's tricky. So somehow you have to get one side started or the other and make the one side that started interested long enough for the other side to begin to participate. How to do this is an open question. A lot of the research that exists in the platform area emphasizes they really look at platforms that have survived. They've gone beyond the startup stage. Even if they fail later on, it's for other reasons. So how do you get started? One thought is that you start out your product, your platform, relying primarily on same side value, okay? And then over time, once you get the market side that's interested in the same side value, you then bring in the benefit of having suppliers because you already have an established consumer base. Another issue is negative externalities. Again, not a huge amount of work on it, or more accurately, there is, but it's not thought about in terms of conventional wisdom as much as it perhaps should be. So to give you an example, I'm going to go back to the Sachs diagram by Uber. And what you'll see here is we've got the old loop, more demand, more drivers, more geographic coverage, faster pickups, and so forth. On the other hand, let's get rid of this. We also have, as you get more demand, you do indeed get more drivers and you get more saturation. And that's all fantastic. And indeed, you get faster pickups. Now, the thing is, though, as you get faster pickups, you're going to get more demand, right? And what that's going to do, though, is it's going to cause those faster pickups to actually slow down. And hence, as those slow down, then demand actually starts decreasing. So there's a balancing loop, that actually chokes off demand once you get beyond a certain point. And there are other negative externalities as well. Additional open questions. One is hybrids. As we mentioned before, Amazon is a hybrid. It's part pipe. It is part platform. Okay, which of those do you concentrate on? And maybe you concentrate on different parts at different times in the life cycle, which would actually help with the spinning up issue as well. And then if you got two types of delivery models, how do you run both of them efficiently? How do you provide competition or prevent competition between yourself and your suppliers? In fact, there's currently an issue at some of the platforms online platforms that you buy from, in that the platform, if it's got a pipe component, may actually see a product from a third-party vendor. It looks pretty good, and then they'll copy it and drive the third-party vendor out of that business. Another question is, how do business-to-business platforms work? Again, on the research side, most of the work has been concentrated in business-to-consumer, and they're not going to be same. So, as one big example, if you're a smartphone company, adding another consumer, relatively costless. You get money from them, actually indirectly from them. But the point is, you add another consumer, it doesn't cost you any more money. It doesn't cost you more support because you got all those forums out there. In fact, it's even better than that because usually there's people who are blogging or vlogging who actually show you how to solve those problems. And you really don't need ongoing support. In contrast, business-to-business platforms, you're looking at, for example, there's one I'm familiar with, which is a platform that mediates the exchange of wood products. So you have different types of woods on one side, and then on the other side, you have companies that use wood, like furniture makers. Now, the thing is that each of those furniture makers are going to have orders that are relatively complex. They're not simple, they're not repeatable, and they have other software applications that have to be worked with, like ERP systems, for example. And so somehow integrating that platform into the suite of software is going to be complicated at a supplier or even a buyer, because it's B2B. So you've got problems on both sides. It costs money to get onboarded, and you have technical support for that. And over time, you're probably going to need more technical support to provide both your customers and your buyers over time. So point is it is not costless to add a participant on either side of a business-to-business platform in many cases. Additionally, as another example, business-to-business platforms, businesses are pretty aware of the fact that their data is valuable. And so when you or I as a consumer use Google, most of us don't think about that much. We allow Google to make money off of us through that data aggregation. Businesses are going to be much more sophisticated. In addition to that, they are seriously worried about losing data that will provide a competitive advantage, perhaps for some other participants in the market, particularly for their competitors. So how you function in that environment is not as well understood as it is in B2C. So with that completes our introduction to platforms. At this point, you should be able to understand what a platform is, how it creates value. In fact, there are 3 different ways to do so. You should understand the decisions, and in some cases, the reasons you might choose how to make a decision with respect to your platform. And last, I've also explained some of the open issues out there where we're not as certain. There isn't so much conventional wisdom, there isn't research and so forth about how a platform behaves. In that case, what I would suggest to you is, if you see some of that advice in a trade publication or what have you, take it with a grain of salt. So with that, I thank you. And this concludes our presentation.